We begin in West Africa, where the Ovie of Eworobo Kingdom, Ughelli South local government area of Delta State, southern Nigeria, Clement Ogenerukewe Ikolo Urukwe 1, who voluntarily surrendered himself Thursday evening, has been flown to Abuja. He was escorted to the Asaba International Airport by both the commanding officer, 63 Division, Brigade Nigeria Army, Asaba, and Delta State Police Commissioner and other security military officers. He boarded Air Peace Airline and the plane departed Asaba Airport tarmac at about 9:10 a.m. to Abuja. The Defense Headquarters had declared 8 persons wanted in connection to the murder of 17 military personnel in Okwama, Ughelli South local government area of Delta State, including him. In the meantime, some residents of Okwama community in Ughelli South local government area of Delta State who fled their homes in the aftermath of the 14th of March killing of soldiers have appealed to the federal government and state government to come to their aid. News Central correspondent Austin Azu brings us details.
It is 2 weeks now since the killing of 17 soldiers in Okwama community in Ughelli South local government area of Delta State. The aftermath led to the residents fleeing for safety, while the military took over the community. Most of the fleeing residents of the community are not willing to be engaged in a conversation, nor famed. But one who pleaded anonymity said children, women and men of Okwama community who fled their homes are still taking refuge in the bush with no shelter, food, water or healthcare facilities. He narrated that they have lost some persons to sickness and snake bites. He also appealed to the federal and state government and other good-spirited individuals to come to their rescue to avoid more casualties.
Rescue our people from the bush. Because as I'm talking to you now, the whole Okwama community has been graded down by these military men. There is no building remaining in Okwama. Because a few days ago, they carried 2 caterpillars to the Okwama when I'm still crying. But today, as I'm talking to you now, the whole community has been graded down. Because when the governor of Delta State went there, they deprived this man access to the community. When a commissioner of police went to the community to go and visit, they deprived this man access to the community. Nobody has went there to see what is going on in this community. Even though in the community people, nobody has been there to witness what is even going on right now. We now appeal to the whole nation to intervene into this matter. They should come to Okwama rescue.
He further called on relevant authorities to prevail on the military to allow them return to their community to enable them pick the pieces of what is left of their lives. In Delta State for News Central, I'm Austin Azu.
It was mixed feelings at the Kuria community located in Chikun local government area of Kaduna State as villagers trooped out en masse to welcome their children who were kidnapped 3 weeks ago. The children, who spent 16 days in captivity, were abducted from the LEA Primary School, Kuria, on March the 17th, but later rescued by the military on Sunday, the 24th, in Zamfara State. Marvelous Obomanu reports.
Uneasy calm has returned to Kuria community, located in Kaduna State, Nigeria's northwestern region. Villagers, including children, trooped out en masse to welcome their kidnapped children, now rescued by the military. For families of the kidnapped Kuria school children, it has been a long wait, but finally, for many of them, there is relief at last.
The moment we've all been waiting for is here. The villagers are all in a celebrative mood, awaiting the return of their children who were abducted.
Some of the villagers who could not hide their excitement spoke exclusively to News Central TV.
Alhamdulillah, ina cikin farin ciki dangane da dawowar wayannan ƴaƴana mu da gwamnati ta yi mana Da farko muna so mu gode ma Allah subhanahu wataala, sannan na biyu muna so mu gode ma gwamnatin jihar Kaduna ceto mana yaranmu daga hannun 'yan fashin daji. Gaskiya kusan a cikin kwana 21 nan bacci ina tsammanin inda ba barawo ba, gaskiya duk dare yadda na rana haka nake ganin dare saboda bakin cikin rashin ganin 'ya'yan guda.
Irin daɗin ma irin wanda bai mutuwa nan ne, alhamdulillah mun ji daɗi sosai, alhamdulillah. Kuma wannan gwamnati mun mata godiya, mun ma Allah godiya, domin Allah ya yaran da aka kwashe farkon kwasan su an tasa su da yawa, ba su kasa irin 200 da wani abu nan zuwa kusan 300. Da haka tafi da su wasu suka dinga samun mafita suna da dawowa.
Ina cikin damuwa amma na yi farin ciki sosai saboda akwai babban ɗan shi a ciki. Na yi farin ciki kuma ina jin daɗi, kuma na jinjina ma gwamnatin jihar Kaduna da wannan ƙoƙari da ta yi na dawo mana da 'ya'yanmu da ƙannanmu da 'yan uwa ga baki ɗaya da ta yi, ina jinjina mata. Shi kuma Abubakar Isa, Allah Ubangiji ya gafarta mishi, Allah Ubangiji ya karɓi shahadan shi.
Finally, these children have been reunited with their community. They are happy. Some of them are showing their emotions. Right now, they are being embraced by their community members.
Some of the kidnapped victims spoke of their experience in captivity.
Daga 12 na safe da muka fara tafiya ba muka isa Zamfara ba sai karfe 2 na dare muka isa Zamfara. Sai ba su ba mu da suke ba mu ke dafa mu na ci. Ni suka ba mu da safe dare, so biyu suke ba mu a rana, sai kuma duka. In za ka je ma fitsari sai kai tsallan kwado sannan in ka dawo, sai kai tsallan kwado ga duka. Duka ne ma ya kashe malamin mu. Mana Abubakar rakan duka tun wajen zuwa suke dukan shi a fuska, ba masu dukan shi a jiki sai dai a fuska.
Gaskiya na ji daɗi, ni ba abin da ban ji ba, gaskiya na ji daɗi, na ji farin ciki, kuma Allah saka mu wanda suke mana da alkhairi, mun gode.
Many residents of the community say they expect government to provide a safe haven for the children in the community to be able to continue with their education in a conducive and safe environment. In Kaduna for News Central, I am Marvelous Obama.
Thank you, Marvelous, for that report. Now, as the Tripartite Committee on New National Minimum Wage concludes its public hearing in the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria, the federal government is considering sanctioning states that are reluctant to implement the new minimum wage. The sanction was part of the recommendations by the stakeholders who attended the public hearing. Although the recommended sanctions remain sketchy, it was gathered that those states may not benefit from federal government grants. It is expected that the old minimum wage of 30,000 naira per month will cease to be effective on March 31st for a new rate to take effect, which President Bola Ahmed Tinubu may announce on May 1st, 2024. Now, over 15 states have not been paying the current 30,000 naira minimum wage implemented since 2019. To discuss this, I'm joined by business and social policy analyst Kenneth Ikenwa. Hello, Kenneth. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good afternoon, Dashen. Thanks for having me on.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. So, Kenneth, are you of the opinion that the states lagging behind, in the payment of the minimum wage should be sanctioned as proposed by the Tripartite Committee on Minimum Wage?
Well, in answering that question, we have to take a look at what the provision of the law actually makes. Because I think that to start talking about sanctioning states at this point in time will not also be accommodating the economic realities that most states have faced in the last 2 to 3 years, where we've experienced a depression and where we've experienced a recession. But the issue of the new minimum wage is bullish. So I'd like to take the bull by the horn and hold the 2 horns. The first will be to actually look at the new minimum wage and to look at the possibility of sanctions and why most states have not been able to pay. The other would be prescriptive, which is, from my own point of view, what I will prescribe should be the range of the new minimum wage, which we're expecting to be announced on May 1st. So let's come to the first one. One, I'm surprised that most states are not able to pay this, even in 2024. Particularly my states, Delta and Bayelsa, because these are 2 oil-producing states, and these are states that also earn from 13% derivation, and one would have expected that they should be able to pay the minimum wage of 30,000. it's quite disappointing. But we look at the issues and look at the law. I do not know how the federal government will go about sanctioning these states. I think the best that the federal government could do is to maybe use the carrot and stick approach. And the other thing that the federal government could also do is to withdraw the collateral signatory for some of these subnationals, by that I mean states, especially when they go outside the shores of Nigeria to look for loans, to look for aid, to actually shore up their budgets and implement the projects that they want to do or want to execute in their states. So it's something that the federal government should actually take by the horn, like I'm suggesting I'm doing right now. I see no reason why, particularly with the removal of subsidy, it is obvious, like the president said in the last couple of 1 or 2 weeks ago, that the revenue has increased and the states, from what we see on a monthly allocation basis, are getting more monies into their accounts from the FAC allocation. So we need to now hold some of these states and the governors of this state to the jugular and ask them what they are doing with the excess that is coming in from crude, excess that is coming in from the savings that have been made from subsidy. My position is that the sanctions are welcome, and that those states in Nigeria, as we speak, should have an excuse for not meeting up with at least 30% minimum wage.
All right,
Before
now talking about the excuse for not being able to meet up, the payment of these minimum wage, these particular states actually cited low revenue as a factor or even a challenge for their inability to implement even the 30,000 naira minimum wage. But in your honest opinion, is this an excuse?
Well, it is not an excuse. In fact, it is utterly bemusing, but beyond being bemusing, we should look at it from a bigger picture. This brings to the challenges of federalism. This brings to the question whether we are actually practicing the federalism that the Constitution says we should practice. Now, for me, I see it as a challenge for each state, because what most states actually do is that they are not creative enough to generate internal generated revenue for themselves to meet up with their the aspects of their commitments to their employees or to members of that state that are employed by the state to pay their salaries. So what this means is that most states actually just wait for allocation. Most governors don't even stay in their state. They stay in Abuja, waiting for allocation and then going back to disburse allocation. So it is a problem that points to a bigger problem. It is something that should bring us to a point of convergence, not divergence, and to ensure and to give a directive and to hold these states and the governors to the jugular and ask them to start being creative. Most of these states are endowed with humongous mineral resources and natural human endowment that they are not taking advantage of. So this is the time to look inwards. This is the time to stop, torpedoing at that point of inflection, have some reflection, and start seeing how they can now generate more revenue and meet their commitments going forward. Okay. Aside from the fact that they are now even getting much more from the federal account.
All right, now still talking about them not being able to generate a revenue from low revenue, an upward review of the minimum wage, and a possible sanction of those states which might mean them not even likely to benefit from federal government grants, right? How do you think that these sanctions might affect the financial stability of these non-compliant states? Because some have actually said that rather than punish them, on the contrary, there should be measures in place to support these states, that are struggling to implement the minimum wage, especially considering the disparity, in revenue among states, so as to ensure uniform implementation of the minimum wage.
All right, Dashen, some of us are out there and we're actively reading and monitoring what is actually happening in most of these states. And I can tell you and beat my chest, to this point, that most of these states have no excuse for not being able to meet up with paying the minimum wage, especially considering the fact, I'm saying this for the third time, that revenues allocated to these states have improved over time. Now, what will be the implications of actually sanctioning them? I think it will be time for most of these states to start looking inwards. The implication will actually be that most of these states will embark on a retrenchment of staff, which will mean that most staff in some of these states will have to lose their jobs under the guise and under the pretense that they don't have enough money to pay these members of staff. But there could be some form of palliative that could be put in place. And rewards and compensation in forms of salaries and minimum wage should not just be tied to the figures that we actually look at, as prescribed by the law. These states can look at a modular approach to paying the minimum wage or to compensating their staff by introducing some other fringe benefits, health management benefits, and some other benefits, retirement benefits, and also, maybe engaging some of these members of staff that may be willing to retire at an early age so that they can be paid their gratuity and go on to do something more enterprising with whatever they earn in gratuity. So I do not think there's any cause for any alarm. It is a cause for us to look at the bigger picture, to actually signal to the states and signal to individuals that the time for us to be quite enterprising in all that we do at the individual level, at the national level, and at the state level is now. This is the time for more creativity across the nooks and crannies of the entire federation.
All right, well, just before I let you go, Kenneth, now there's this section that, a lot of people seem to, avoid, and that's the private sector. How will the federal government ensure that the private sector employers also comply with the minimum wage?
Well, I don't think the private sector is having too much of a problem with compliance with the minimum wage, except, of course, for some of the organizations that are not being covered by maybe pension allocation and that are not being monitored by the relevant regulatory authorities. Now, what this means is that most of the regulatory authorities have to come on board, particularly the pensions, the Pension Commission and the Corporate Affairs Commission, to help the government monitor what these companies are doing. And also, there has to be employee activism, a high degree of employee activism, so that the employees themselves can start getting around and can start joining unions, so that they can also report their employers, to the government, to say the government is not actually meeting up with the minimum wage.
But some of these private employers don't even allow their employees join these, the unions.
That, again, is another problem. This is a democracy, and the democracy, one of the principal pivots of democracy is a freedom of association. So I am happy that we're at this junction in our point of trajectory, democratic trajectory. This will now mean that all hands have to be on deck, and people should allow employers should allow their employees become members of relevant unions that are peculiar or particular to their kind of business. But for me, I think the major challenge, away from all the discourse so far, should be what should be the prescribed minimum wage. Now, the NLC has prescribed 1 million. I think that is unrealistic. At the point in time they prescribed 200,000, I also think that may not be possible, considering the economic realities that we're facing and the fact that we're just recovering from all fronts economically. So if you ask me, when you look at the basic staple food of Nigerians, which is bread, an average loaf of bread in Lagos, for instance, goes for about 1,000 naira. And a family of 4 would need about 2 loaves of bread to satisfy those families every day in Nigeria. That's 2,000. By 30 days, that's 60,000. So a minimum wage of 60,000 doesn't definitely work for Nigerians now. And if the the price of petrol has gone up by 200%, I would expect that the new range of minimum wage should also go up between 200 and 300%. So I am hopeful that on May 1st, we will be expecting the President of the Federal Republic to announce nothing less than 90,000 as minimum wage for every Nigerian going forward. I repeat, 90,000 should be the minimum wage going forward.
All right, well, thank you so much, business and social policy analyst Kenneth Ikenwa, for joining me and speaking on this.
Thanks for having me on. Shalom.
You're welcome. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has felicitated Christians in the country and around the world as they celebrate the Easter season. Easter is an event that commemorates the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. It also symbolizes Christ's victory over sin and death. Now, to mark the day, President Tinubu, in a Friday statement, called on Christians to imbibe the virtues of love, sacrifice, and compassion associated with the season. The president hailed the resilience and sacrifices of Nigerians, saying it is necessary for economic recovery. Ex-Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has extended birthday greetings to President Bola Tinubu, who turned 72 on Friday, March 29, 2024. Buhari commended Tinubu for making sustained efforts to overcome the many problems of the country, as he wished him many happy returns of the day. Now, the Deputy Senate President, Senator Jibrin Barrow, also congratulated Tinubu, describing him as a visionary leader. Also, the Lagos State Governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, congratulated Tinubu on his birthday, describing him as a courageous, audacious, and passionate leader who is committed to the progress, growth, and development of Nigeria. Last Sunday, Tinubu asked well-meaning friends and family members to keep his birthday low-key. The presidency revealed this in a statement signed by Tinubu's Special Advisor on Information and Strategy, Bayo Ononuga. Now to a bit of business. All banks in Nigeria have been given a directive to recapitalize within the next 24 months and should present an implementation plan of how it will achieve this to the Central Bank of Nigeria before April 30. Now, a statement signed by the Director, Financial Policy and Regulations Department of the Apex Bank, Haruna Mustafa, disclosed the minimum capital base for a commercial bank with international authorization will be 500 billion naira. Now, for commercial banks with national authorization, the capital base will be 200 billion naira, while regional banks are expected to build their capital base to 50 billion naira. CBN also pegged the new capital base for merchant banks at 50 billion naira. While non-interest banks with national authorization should improve to 20 billion naira capital base, and those with regional authorization should have a minimum of 10 billion naira capital base. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by Head Capital Markets Interstate Securities, Vincent Oshoma. Hello, Vincent. Thank you so much for joining me at this time.
Thanks for having me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. All right, so Vincent, the circular says the recapitalization is aimed at bolstering the bank's resilience, solvency, and capacity to support growth in the economy. Now, is this being threatened right now?
Yeah, I would say in respect to their capacity, the bank capacity to support the economy, like the CBN mentioned, with the plan by the current administration to grow Nigeria economy to 1 trillion. I don't think everybody will agree that the banks are not in a position to support a 1 trillion economy. And also, when you look at what has happened recently, they talked about the recent headwinds, both within the country and outside, internal and external, with respect to the devaluation of the naira. You will agree that the current value of the respect of the exchange rate has really affected the value of the bank's capital. So the need to increase it, which the CBN governor has been talking about since last year. There's a need, the need is already there. Also looking at the Nigerian banks, their position in Africa. Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa, but we can't say our banks are not in the top 10 banks in Africa. So there's a need to grow our banks to be able to support the economy and also grow to dominate the African continent, just like we are #1 in Africa.
All right, Vincent. Now, the banks have actually been given 3 options: injection of fresh equity capital, M&As, or upgrade or downgrade of license authorizations. Now, what must these banks consider before settling for any of all the 3 options?
Yeah, I think they have to look at their operation, their current position with respect to their capital base and also the expected increase in new minimum, and look at the various options they have to be able to meet those, meet the new minimum capital base. For the big banks, I think, I don't think it will be very difficult for them to raise money. I don't think the options of measures will not be, except for acquisition. The small banks will be looking at merging and also being acquired by the big banks. Because at the end of this exercise, what will definitely play out is that we have smaller number of banks in the system, just like we had in the last recapitalization, where there was a shrinking in the number of banks from about 89 to about 25 at the end of the day. So we expect to see a reduction in number of banks. So I think they have to look at the various options. Also, in looking at taking the option of measures, they have to look at companies, corporates that have similar ideas, similar goals with them, for them to be able to measure otherwise there will be issues at the end of the day. So I think they have to look at their current position and their operation, their goal in looking at the various options that are available to them.
Okay, now, Vincent, you said the smaller banks might actually have more issues recapitalizing. Now, but what do you make of the exclusion of retained interest from the calculation of banks' shared capital, seeing that in accounting terms, retained earnings are considered a component of a company's equity because they represent profits that have not been distributed as dividends but are instead reinvested in the bank?
Yeah, for me and for most analysts, I think that's the sticky point in this recapitalization program that has been announced, because we are all expecting it for the recapitalization. But I think the sticky point that in a focus, a main point of discussion is the issue, the fact that the CBN is sticking to paid-off capital and also the premium. I think one of the things that the CBN is looking at is that they are looking at bringing in new funds, not the banks just using retained earnings to get their current shareholders fund to meet the minimum capital. I think CBN is looking at the banks going to bring new funds. That's why they have to stick to this part of the policy, which has generated a lot of controversy. For me, I think it's not what is expected, but the reason behind the opportunity for discussion. Let's see what happens in terms of the banks we're discussing with CBN, if there will be some level of variation with respect to this policy. But I think it's a major point in this new policy release.
All right, well, thank you so much, Vincent Oshoma, for your expert's opinion on this topic. We appreciate you for your time. Well, away from that, Nigeria's Minister of Works has given the China Civil Engineering Construction Company a 7-day ultimatum to complete the repair works on its section of the Port Harcourt-Aba Expressway in order to reduce the hardship being faced by road users. The minister, during an inspection tour of several key road projects in the south, south, and southeast region of the country, assured that government will not compromise on quality of roads being repaired and those being constructed afresh. Amadin Uyi reports.
It was an inspection visit of the ongoing rehabilitation works of the Section 4 of the Enugu-Port Harcourt dual carriageway, the Aba-Port Harcourt highway, and several others being handled by the China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation Limited.
The one they have done, I think 2.5 kilometers, they did the shoulders with asphalt. But going forward, they're going to do the shoulders with concrete, and we've directed that they should also do some cutting and fill with bitumen, to create expansion joint.
The minister commended the construction company for a job well done, but however gave them a 7-day ultimatum to finish the section of the Port Harcourt-Aba Expressway, saying it is causing a lot of hardship for users of the road.
So I'm begging CCC and the controller and engineers to do everything possible in the next 7 days and create a smooth sail, on this right-hand side. I will be coming back. I've been here for more than 7 times. I'll be coming again for it. I intend to visit, all projects with this frequency. This is what Mr. President directed.
Those in attendance gave an overview of the quality of work seen on ground and the efforts being put in place to ensure that they are duly repaired and completed.
For the 2 days we've been on the road, it's been like never before. And I want to say that I am proud that he is exceeding expectations. And I want to say that I've been vindicated that the president did not make any mistake. His passion, his expertise impacts on the design, impacts on the quality, impacts on the speed, impacts on the durability, and in fact impacts on the style of project implementation.
The most important thing is not only the quality of the roads that we have seen, but the fact that it's being done at the lowest level of amount of money that they could spend. What the Honorable Minister is saving the country, saving from the budget, saving the nation, on the instruction of Mr. President, is unquantifiable. This is democracy in action.
For his constant supervision of all projects in his ministry. This is what we were lacking before. Like he said here, he's not an office minister. He moved from site to site to ensure that the jobs are done according to specification. And that is what we want in this country.
The minister also called for the redesign of the second Niger Bridge bypass in Asaban, Onitsha, saying this will save government about 300 billion naira. In Abuja for News Central, I am Amadin Uyi.
The news continues in West Africa, where economists are calling for an adequate debt restructuring plan, prevent insolvency, and create alternatives to external loan support programs on debt sustainability. They made this call at the ongoing International Conference on Africa Debt Crisis, which seeks to address the current debt problem in the continent and exploitation of its resources in exchange for bad debts. News Central's Adeshawa Odushoga reports.
It's the second day of the International Conference on Africa Debt Crisis and International Financial Architecture holding in Accra, Ghana. The areas of discuss focuses on three major subtopics, which includes African debt default and restructuring in Asia and Latin America, debt, gender and social policy, and conversations around how Ghana arrived at its current debt crisis and how to get out of it. Speakers here are emphasizing on the continuous debt that Africa has accrued over the years, primarily due to the rise in interest rate, often higher than its economic growth rate and fluctuating exchange rate within its grace period.
There are, of course, differences between countries in terms of their level of development, in terms of their structure, etc. But they seem to somehow be sort of caught in the similar trap. So it's to try and look at the experiences of these particular countries and why, despite the differences between them, they are in a context in which they are faced with the same kind of both debt and development crisis. And therefore, what should be the common elements of any resolution strategy?
Credit rating agencies have also been urged to be objective and promote inclusivity with its rating information and modalities, especially as it concerns African countries. Highlighting measures to avoid a further escalation of its debt crisis, Africa is advised to build an industrialized economy, form a more unified economic bloc, as well as build an indigenous capacity within the continent.
A lot of African countries depend on commodities. In Nigeria, it's oil. In Zambia, for instance, it's copper. In Ghana, where we are, it's cocoa, gold. And these commodities, their prices are volatile, unpredictable, and internationally determined, right? So for us to have better predictability and resilience in our debt management policies, it's important that we industrialize. So rather than export commodities.
One of the main things to learn about is how to deal with vultures, which are these holdouts who opt out of the restructuring and try to really introduce as many clauses and as many lessons possible from previous restructurings. We even had a ship which was captured here in Ghana just because of the vultures' actions. Vultures are litigating funds which buy on the secondary buy debt of the sovereign debt of the countries on secondary markets in order to litigate.
Issues around tax mobilization and debt restructuring were also brought to the fore. Speakers also emphasized the need to increase internal revenue to finance infrastructure projects, spelling out loan objectives and non-reliance on foreign debts. In Accra, Ghana, for News Central, Adeshawa Odushoga.
Thank you, Adeshawa, for that report. Now, Senegal's anti-establishment leader, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, was welcomed at the presidential palace by outgoing leader Macky Sall. The meeting, which came after weeks of crisis surrounding the vote, suggested a swift and peaceful handover in the West African nation that prides itself on democratic stability in a coup-hit region. Faye was only freed from prison 10 days before the election, along with his mentor, Usman, who was barred from running following a criminal conviction he says was politically motivated. The outgoing president received both men in what his office called a courteous meeting, where they discussed at length the major issues of the state as well as the inauguration ceremony. Now let's move to Southern Africa, where South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma has survived a car accident after a vehicle transporting him was hit by a drunk driver overnight. The incident happened just hours after electoral officials barred Zuma from standing in the May 29th general election, further stoking tensions in the run-up to the polls. According to the police, the 51-year-old man was arrested in KwaZulu-Natal province for drunk driving as well as on a charge of reckless and negligent driving. Zuma and his bodyguards escaped uninjured, and the 81-year-old was taken to his place of residence. Now in East Africa, Human Rights Watch says Somalia's president or parliament should reject any proposed constitutional amendments that would weaken rights protections for children. On Saturday, both houses of parliament are expected to vote on the proposed amendments which would reduce the age of majority, increasing the risk of child marriage and lowered juvenile justice standards, and possibly permit certain forms of female genital mutilation. Somalia's 2012 provisional constitution has been under review for nearly a decade, but efforts to finalize the review have picked up since late 2023. In February, the Independent Constitutional Review and Implementation Commission sent Parliament suggested amendments to the provisional constitution's first 4 chapters, which includes articles on the age of majority and on the criminalization of female genital mutilation. Now in news from around the world, in commemoration of Easter, Christians mark Good Friday in Jerusalem's Old City, following the path Christians believe Jesus walked while carrying his cross, known as the Via Crucis, before being crucified and entering the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Because of the war, of course. People are afraid. They haven't come, but normally there'd be pilgrims from the whole world that would be here.
Queremos la paz para todos. Nos da mucho pesar lo que están pasando en ambos lados, pero nosotros creemos que nuestro Dios es de paz y amor.
The General Director of Renault, Luca De Meo, with the Minister of the Economy, Bruno Le Maire, and the Mayor of Le Havre, Edouard Philippe, announced on the manufacturing of a new utility vehicle 100% electric by 2026. These new generation vans will supply the Flexus joint venture created by Renault, Volvo, and the ship owner, with 550 hires in 4 years for the Sandoval site. 1 in 60 utility vehicles sold in Europe is manufactured by Renault. He recalled, and 85% of them are manufactured in France on 3 sites, including Sandoval, where the Renault traffic is assembled.
Elle représente un investissement de 300 millions d'euros, 550 emplois, et surtout c'est l'avenir du site de Sandouville qui est garanti pour une quinzaine d'années. Je rappelle que sur ce site, il y a quelques années, on parlait fermeture. Il y avait une inquiétude profonde des salariés. Aujourd'hui, grâce à l'appui de l'État, grâce à l'investissement de Luca De Meo, grâce à la stratégie industrielle de Renault, nous avons 15 années d'activité devant nous pour le site de Sandouville. C'est la preuve que le passage à l'électrique, l'électrification de l'industrie automobile française va ouvrir la voie à une nouvelle ère de l'industrie automobile française, dans laquelle nous allons recréer des emplois, recréer des filières, la filière des batteries.
Let's take a look at business, where Binance executive Tigran Gambaryan has filed a lawsuit against Nigeria's National Security Advisor and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, alleging violations of his rights. Represented by lawyer Olujoke Aliu, Gambaryan seeks relief alongside Nadeem Anjarwala, Binance's Africa Regional Manager. Both demand release and passport return, citing constitutional breaches. Dr. Iwa Salami, an expert in financial law and regulation, shared insights why the crackdown on Binance in Nigeria is happening now.
It has been a quite heavy one, because when cryptocurrency exchanges began to operate, a few good years ago, there were no regulatory arrangements or framework for them. There wasn't any requirements for crypto exchanges comply with the most basic regulatory requirements, such as to know the people that are transacting on them, such as what we commonly refer to as KYC, know your customer requirements. So all the exchanges across the world were operating, and the nature of cryptocurrency exchanges is that they're not your traditional brick and mortar, exchanges. These are exchanges that really are facilitated and really operate and run on blockchains, and therefore, it's very.
Manchester City and Chelsea could face expulsion from the Premier League if found guilty of breaching financial fair play rules. Now, two clubs have already received point deductions this season for similar infractions, raising questions about consistent penalties. Manchester City denies 115 allegations, while Chelsea is flagged for illicit payments. Manchester City's case concludes in the 24-25 season, and Chelsea awaits formal charges amid ongoing investigations. Babatunde Koiki, editor at Sports Desk News Central TV, shares insights on preventive measures for stricter FFP compliance in the Premier League.
All these accounts are making sure that there's no hint of financial doping, as it were, because basically what the Premier League is trying to do is that these clubs do not spend more than they earn. And new relegations are coming, making it increasingly impossible for these clubs to have any form of financial issues. Basically, what the authorities are trying to do is to ensure that these clubs continue to operate as a going concern in a sustainable manner, and they don't basically rely on, do I say, the sugar daddy syndrome, whereby there's just a foreign owner who's just pumping money into the club. He's not concerned about sustainability. He just wants to buy success. So the authorities are bringing new regulations in trying to ensure that these clubs are run sustainably.
Now in sports, Cross River State will host its inaugural 14-kilometer marathon on March 30 with over 250 runners from across the nation and beyond confirming their participation. Organized by the Tourism Bureau in collaboration with the Calabar Marathon Foundation, the event aims to showcase sporting talents and also attract global attention. Managing Director of the Cross River State Tourism Bureau, Prince Ekmayong Ojoy, highlighted the race's goal to stir youth away from negative influences. Despite concerns about a clash with the state's monthly sanitation exercise, Governor Basi Otu's Chief Press Secretary, Nsai Jill, affirmed that the marathon will proceed as scheduled with special arrangements made to accommodate both events. The race-themed Say No to Drugs will commence from Millennium Park and conclude at the Marina Resort, offering prizes totaling 500,000 naira for male and female winners. Arsenal has officially signed rising star Ethan Nwaneri, the 17-year-old. And that's all at this hour. But before we go, here's another look at some of our top stories. We told you that Ewu monarch on army wanted list over Okwama killings in Delta State has been flown to Abuja. We also told you that former South African President Jacob Zuma has survived a car crash. Finally, you heard that Human Rights Watch has urged Somalia to reject lowering age of majority. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Dashen Usman.